Shavua Tov, a good week. Welcome to a first installment of a new, well, let's be fancy and call it a series. People have been asking for Zohar, straight up, simple, straightforward Zohar, without a lot of the structural, theoretical kabbalah, the words of the Zohar, what's going on? Why is this 8-volume collection change the world? And why do nations everywhere study it? And the Jewish people have been blessed to be the recipient or the inheritor of this tremendous book. Well, it's a book that's filled with understanding and wisdom, but it's also filled with prophecies that pertain to our lives. And tonight we're going to do a little piece from Shemot. Listen closely. We're going to go fast. We're not going to sit here for a half hour. It's late already. Got to head to Hebron. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda havu yatvei la'an v'boraita kamei Rabbi Shimon. These two great students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai were sitting and saying words of Torah while the master listens. This is often the way the setup works, is that the students will read to the master, and then the master will stop, or a question will come up, and the master will me'ir, he will bring an insight from what they're reading. And so Rabbi Shimon was sitting there, and Rabbi Yehuda, he said, why is it written that a new king rose up in Egypt? What's the portent of that word kam? Why did this new king get up? Now, kam can mean get up in simple Hebrew. It can mean be established as an institution in the country. But it also can mean something else. What is this? A new king came to Egypt, and we also know taught elsewhere that he got up by himself. In other words, he wasn't placed in kingship by others, but rather he took the throne. Oh, he took the throne. That means it was not exactly divinely directly to begin with. Of course, we say everything was from God, but not when a man takes the will into his own hands. Well, there things happen. We see that he came down. He was down. He wasn't a big guy. Come, he got up, but he wasn't fitting to be king. He wasn't a king worthy of the name king. Kam, but rather the kam means that he got up on his money. He got up with money. He got the throne because of his wealth. Sound familiar? Like way familiar? Rabbi Shimon said, all of this is, as I will explain, just like Achashverosh, the king of Persia, came up into the scene from a lowly place on his own, and he was not fitting to be king of Persia. But he got up because of his wealth. He wanted to remove the Jews from the world. He wanted the Jews gone. Now, why? The Jews were after the first destruction of Babylon. They had 70 years where they were exiled from their land. Of course, there were still Jews in the land, but a large proportion were scattered and exiled. And in those 70 years, in the meantime, Achashverosh received the kingship. Persia took the kingship from Babylon, and now he's a very wealthy man. What's the first thing he does? He wants to go after the Jews. What's the connection? Why does this new king who seems to have everything want to go after the Jews and remove them from the land? And we know that Achashverosh was just as much an anti-Semite as Haman. What's the connection with the Zohar telling us that he got up with his money? In other words, the money and the Jewish thing is very deeply connected. And here too also by the Paro in the days of Moses. There were three Paros, and we're going to talk about them in the next few segments of Saturday Night Zohar. The different Paro, the Paro of Abraham, the Pharaoh of Joseph, and the Pharaoh of Moshe. Three different ones with three different stages of exile. But that's not our point here. We'll get back to that sometime. But here our point is that, again, we have a king that's not fitting to be king, who takes the throne with his money, and the next thing he does, he wants to go after the Jews. What's going on, do you think? But he got up on his own. In other words, he had himself placed in the kingship. So too, Pharaoh, he got himself placed and he went after the Jews. And he said to his nation, right? Both come together, let's have a peace conference. They called it a peace conference. It was really a war conference against the Jews between Pharaoh, between Jethro or Yitro, and Balaam, the great sorcerer from Midian. Okay, well, that's another story that we need to talk about, the pharaohs, those kings. But what's the connection you see between a guy who's not fitting to be king, having a lot of wealth, buying his way to the throne, and going after the Jews? Why the Jews? Well, by this time in the story, the Jews were powerful in Egypt. They had money too. And by the time we got to the story in Persia, the Jews also had thrived under their foreign hosts. And they all of a sudden become a threat when they become wealthy. Isn't that interesting? Or maybe it's a little less subtle. Maybe the king who bought the throne wants to get rid of the Jews so he can inherit their wealth as well. That's certainly what's happened over and over. That's certainly what happened with Germany in World War II. They went after Jewish wealth long before they went after Jewish bodies in the Holocaust. And the same thing in the Inquisition. The Inquisition wasn't a couple of year war. It was 300 years of Roman Catholic sponsored from Rome, the Vatican, along with Spain and Portugal. The Inquisition, 300 years of taking Jewish wealth and giving them a choice of, take the cross or burn on the cross. Take your pick. Or they did give people an exit visa if they wanted, but that just meant almost certain death somewhere else on the way. Now the Zohar ends the paragraph. All this is in one short paragraph about this big. And when there's a king above that's new, so too a new king is replaced below. What does that mean? Well, in Zohar terms, a king means a new one of the ministering angels. You see, the God does everything perfectly with precision. And there's a construct called the 70 nations and Israel. That there's these 70 archetype nations that are listed in the Torah that formed the basis of the upsurgence of the human race on this planet. And these 70 nations each have an angel, which means a conduit of power. Don't get confused by Hollywood or cartoonery. An angel is a conduit of power. It doesn't have free choice. And so each nation has its time on top. 70 nations, 70 epochs in the history of the human race, and they each get a chance to rule. And that's why, if you'll notice, historically, there have been one empire after another for thousands of years. And when one king, one archetype angel goes down, a new one comes up. And so the change in the king in Egypt was also a signal of a change above. That the Pharaoh, the whole Egyptian empire is on the way down. And you'll see this true. The rabbis say, when the nations turn on us, they fail, they crumble, they destroy themselves. And so you see that in this little bit of Zohar, we've received like a piece of world history to understand the patterns and the movements of the nations, the Jewish people, the will of God. But what's the key about the money? Well, money is kingship. Money is power. That's not a new idea to anybody. And when you see your fortunes going up, that means something's going up in heaven. and you see the fortunes go down, it means there's a change going on. But that's on an individual basis. But what about for a king? He's a man that's in charge of the whole country. Well, there is a parallel as well. But when a man takes his wealth and uses it to acquire the throne, he doesn't have the blessing. He doesn't have what we call the Mazal Elyon, the upper constellation, the spiritual route to be king. He's not a worthy king. And you see the way these kings behaved, they proved it. Because Ahasuerus, the king of Persia at the time of the Purim story, was a fool. He was a drunkard. He was well, I don't have to go on and make a list. You can look it up. You can imagine with your own mind. And the other kings with this parallel at the time of Moses was bathing in blood. He was a sorcerer. And people that know about sorcery know that blood is a very powerful substance in the spiritual realm. And they do things like, slaughter and bathe. And it's very sick. And that's part of the reason why the Jewish the tradition and the history of our people is to bring sacrifices to God, measure for measure, against those people who are sacrificing to demons. Now that's a big piece of the occult, and we're not going to go there now. That's not our purpose. Our purpose now is to see the greatness of the view of the Torah lens on reality, and the expanse of the view it gives you, and the ideas of the transitions in kingship and the politics behind it. It's not so simple. It's not so complex, to say. It's rather simple if you look at it through the eyes of the Zohar. So this should at least give us hope that the Jewish story is the story. And the Zohar is the book. And we're going to try to present as many pieces like this as we can, because it's time. It's been time. And I'm tired of being asked to do it. Now I'm going to do it. So I hope you're there. God bless you all. Have a great week. You should look forward to good news and joy, and think good, and it will be good. All the best.